have on my list.
Okay, have fun.
All right, so, well, first, I'm Gary Edwards, president of the Peachtree section. I welcome you to one of our monthly tech sessions. A few ground rules. One is please stay muted unless you're called upon. Sometimes your background noise will interfere with the presentation. And so I ask you to stay muted unless you're called on. When you have questions, put the questions in chat, which reminds me I need to open up a chat window, and chat it to everyone. That way I can see it, Diana can see, everybody can see it. You know, having done these presentations, the presenter really can't, stay on topic and be focused and read the chat window as well. So just chat to everyone in an appropriate time in the presentation. I'll ask the questions of the presenter. That kind of makes it work better. And generally we kind of go until we run out of questions. If you see a question come up during the course of the discussions that you know the answer to, feel free to chat and answer to all. I mean, that's kind of a neat way of not interrupting the presentation, but also adding to the experience. It's kind of like, the whispering in the back row of the guy beside you, but you don't interrupt anybody or bother anybody. So it's perfectly fine here. And the other piece of this is if the unlikely event that we get Zoom bombed or hacked and we can't counter it, what we'll do is we'll terminate the session and we'll immediately have a new session. Go to your email that you registered for. We'll send out the email link and we'll just get back into it. That doesn't happen very much. We've had to do that once in a couple of years we've been doing this kind of stuff, but just in case. And of course, please keep your screen name something that looks like what you registered as, because we get suspicious when we see it's like iPhone 373457 or whatever like that. So please don't do that. Well, that said, let me introduce Brooks Metzler, who is our speaker today. He's one of our members of Peachtree section. He joined in 2021. He's bought his first Mercedes in 2020, and he's jumped in with all 3 feet. He has 3 Mercedes. They're all 1998. There's a E320 wagon, a CL500, which I'm really interested in, and a 98 SL500, which is another wonderful car. And he's developed a lot of interesting experiences because he really likes to work on his car. His profession is e-learning, but he really likes to do it yourself. And we chat a fair amount on Messenger about working on cars as we consult back and forth on things. And honestly, the topic tonight, the headliner replacement, is something I've never done, and he's done about 3 of them. So it's very useful to learn from him in something that's a little bit on the challenging side for some of these cars. So with that said, let me turn it over to Brooks, and let's get going with the presentation. Thank you for doing this, Brooks.
Thank you very much, Gary, and I appreciate the intro for sure. Thank you all for joining tonight. As Gary said, I've done 3 of these headliners, all in Mercedes. So it's not something that I've been doing my whole life, but it's something that I have a bit of experience in. So I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation with y'all, and we will get started. Okay. And can everyone see the title page?
Yes, looks good.
The picture.
Yeah, looks good.
Yeah, thank you. And this is actually my first headliner install. This picture. This was in a W124 94 E320 that I had. Unfortunately, that car got totaled back in November. So this was my first kind of foray into automotive upholstery, I guess. But first of all, I wanted to start out by kind of outlining the problem. This is what causes your headliners to droop. And you can see, like in this photo, the back corner, the fabric will detach from the board, basically. And this is just over years and years of heat and humidity, kind of slowly eating away at this glue and foam mixture that kind of connects the fabric to the board, and it looks bad, as we know. And there are a few remedies that people will try, but ultimately the only really solid, nice looking way to redo this is to remove all the material, remove all the foam, and basically glue new material on the board. So this is basically, you're going to strip the board down, kind of like you see here in this photo to the left. This is all the material gone. This is most of the foam and glue gone as well. And then you're going to have to get your new material, glue it to the board, form it, and trim it. And we'll talk a bit more about this, of course, as we go along in the presentation. So the first step you're going to need to do in this probably is choose what kind of material you want. Basically, I broke it out into three, of the most common types of material you would use. The first one in this picture is going to be an automotive fabric. This is more like if you've seen more modern cars. This is kind of a different sort of material to some of the older vehicles, like my W124. It actually had a sort of vinyl material on the headliner, and I could not find material that matched that. I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but this automotive cloth is going to be the most common and probably the cheapest. And then in the middle, you have Alcantara. This is kind of a interchangeable terms. You can call it Alcantara, faux suede, real suede. Actual suede is not really used that often because it doesn't have very much stretch to it. So you'll want the Alcantara or the faux suede if you're going to go that route. Because as you'll see later, you want the stretch definitely in some areas. And the last option you have would be a foam-backed vinyl, which is going to have the least amount of stretch. So you have to keep that in mind. If you want to use that material, you will not really want to use vinyl if you have a lot of contours, if you have a lot of corners. It's best really only for a flat or mostly flat headliner. And then you'll see in this dark blue box, I've put down some dimensions. So normally this fabric is sold in 60-inch wide sections, which is enough to cover the width of a normal headliner. So when you search for this fabric, I usually get mine on eBay. There's a lot of different sellers. You'll search for automotive fabric, and then pretty much all of it will be in this 60-inch width. And also very important is going to be the foam backing. You're going to want to look for a 1/8 inch foam backing. They also sell, I believe, a 1/4 inch thick, but that will affect like your sunroof opening and things like that. So you want the thinner foam when you're doing this. And then you are going to determine your yardage by an internet search, or, the best approach is going out to your car, measuring exactly what you need, ordering more than you need, of course. And, but normally you're going to be around the 2 or 3 yard range for most of these vehicles. And of course, add more if you want to do your sunroof panel, if your car has a sunroof, or the ABC pillars, whatever you may have. So what else might we need? First of all, we need an adhesive. These are the 2 adhesives that I've used. Both have had really good results. The first is called Permatex Heavy Duty Automotive Headliner Adhesive. And then the other one is a 3M headliner adhesive. These are, I haven't really experimented with others. There's I think there's like a 3M Super 90, Super 80, something like that adhesive, but I've just gone straight with the headliner adhesives and I haven't had any trouble with these. The longest term of a headliner I've redone was about 2.5 years. So, I think 2 summers it lasted through in my E320, and there was no sagging, no problems with that. So either one of these adhesives run about, I think, $20-25 a can, and you'll use about a can of it on one headliner. So I also put down some nice fabric scissors. These are good to have. Of course, you could use regular scissors, but the fabric scissors just work a little nicer. You'll want a set of fresh razor blades for those detail areas that I'll get to later. And then it'll also be good for the when you're prepping the headliner board to have a drill with just a regular wire brush attachment, like the one pictured here. So just a cordless drill, which I think most people will have around the house somewhere. Now we can get into actually removing the headliner. And I've tried to keep it pretty general here because it varies, you know, from car to car. This picture also from my W124 sedan. You can see in some vehicles, it takes quite a lot of contorting, and you have to have it a certain way to fit it out of the car. So to remove, just in general, you're going to want to start with the front of the car, remove the mirror, the visors, your overhead control panel, dome light assembly. And for most chassis, I've found it's pretty well documented by other people who've done it. So if you search, you know, W202, R129 for the hardtop, you can usually find good resources if you can't, if you aren't able to figure it out by looking at it. And there are some really, you know, kind of odd things that I'll get into on certain models. But then next, you're going to want to go ahead with the A, B, and C pillar trims and the grab handles. These are pretty much always going to need to come out, or at least come down in the case of like the B pillars in most cars. And then a lot of times there's a little bit of periphery, some trim and things that need to be removed around your sunroof if you have a sunroof. So again, that's going to be more model specific. To continue with the interior disassembly, here's just a couple notes on this picture is from a W203 from a C-Class. And in this particular car, they actually glued most of the wiring for all the overhead stuff to the board. And the wiring actually comes from the rear of the car, from the rear SAM. So in the workshop instructions, it says to disconnect that wiring from the SAM. That's one approach you can take, or you can pull the wiring carefully off of the headliner board, which is what I did, and reglue it later. And then this is the most fun part, sarcasm, is getting the headliner out of the car, especially if you have a sedan. This can be quite tricky. This is that same C-Class, and the board is down, but there is a very limited space in which you can actually get the board out of the car, and you need to be, of course, very careful about not damaging, you know, things in your interior in this case. In the case with this car, and I think with the W211, the workshop instructions actually specify that you can bend this board a little bit. Of course, don't bend it a lot because it's fiberglass and it'll just snap if you bend it too much. But in this case, you can bend it a little bit, they say. Also, what I've found helpful with the tricky ones like that is fully recline or even remove the seat from the car. And in that C-Class as well, you needed to remove the center console piece so that you have just that much, you know, that 2 or 3 inches of extra space to fit it in that direction. Now, if you have a wagon like my S210 pictured here, it's great because you drop it, you pull it right out the hatch. So if you have like an ML or, you know, any other SUV or wagon, this is going to be very easy. I think also the coupes, all of our lovely, you know, pillarless coupes, I think you can fit the headliner out just the side windows as well. So the next stage is going to be removing material and prepping this fiberglass headliner board for when you apply your new material. So you'll see when you flip this board over that there are these little metal surrounds. These are what kind of the dome light snaps into, the driver's mirror or the rear view mirror inside the car, things like that. You're just going to bend these tabs back. Be careful not to, distort it too much, of course. And then, set these to the side until it's time to reinstall. And then we're going to remove all of the fabric that remains. This should be pretty easy because, the glue breaks down and the foam just kind of turns to dust. So this is also really messy. Before you do this, of course, try and lay down some stuff in your interior, or you'll be cleaning up a lot like I did the first one I did on my 124. And then this is what the board's going to look like once you pull that material off. You'll see that there's still quite a bit of foam on here. Sometimes you'll still have kind of tacky wet glue, which I'll talk about how to get rid of that. But this is basically what your board on the, the side that's facing out on the car is going to look like. So this is where the drill with the wire brush is going to come in. This works best if you have, like that previous picture, mostly just dried foam and glue. If you have glue that's still a bit tacky, or, it's summertime, the glue has gotten tacky just by sitting out in the car, I've used like a plastic trim tool or a scraper. I guess you could kind of use like a drywall tool or something too to scrape that mixture off. And then after that, if you've got, that glue residue, you're going to want to use a degreaser, or, something like Purple Power is what I use to really get that board as clean and as dry as you can, because it's kind of like, painting something. It's largely in the preparation, if not all in the preparation. So now we can move to gluing and trimming the new material to the board. Now that you've got the board prepared, you can start to unroll your material and then fit your headliner kind of face down. I have on all of mine, I've traced out around, like you can see here in the picture. I've left plenty of excess room with the material, because that old adage where it's like, measure twice, cut once, measure 3 or 4 times, cut once even, is a good idea. So you never want to be short of material, because this of course needs to look like one contiguous piece in the car. So after I've marked it out, I will flip the board around with the material, and then I don't have a picture of this, unfortunately, but I've actually folded, or I will fold half of the material over so that you expose, half of your fiberglass board on this side, half of the foam facing side. And then what you can do as well is slide a piece of cardboard even between that basically the 2 sides of your new material, so that you don't get overspray on the other facing side. And then as you start to apply the glue, of course, you're going to want even coverage. You're going to want coverage on both your foam and your fiberglass headliner board. And then you don't want to really soak it down, though. You want to get kind of a nice balance of glue on there, because it can bleed through if you use just a ton of glue. But then another important point is that these adhesives take about 4 or 5 minutes to tack up. So you don't want to spray it immediately and try and, slap it together right then, because you're not going to get the, the right amount of adhesion that you need. You really need to give it 4 or 5 minutes, probably longer if it's hotter or more humid outside, ideally you do this outside or in your garage. And then once that glue is started to tack up, you can start to work it into, work your material into the board. I like to work in sections starting from the center. So the center, towards the back behind the sunroof part in the picture, and then work my way out to the edges and the indented areas. So, you're going to have indented areas where your interior grab handles are. You want to make sure that you use your hands and contour the material down into those shallower parts. And then I kind of work my way to the outside, work my way to the edges. I don't just glue it all in one shot. I like to do sections, fold the material over sections, smooth it out, and then kind of work from the back to the front too, because all of the ones I've done have had the cars had a sunroof. So that contour, of course, you need to make sure you kind of get it started into the fold. And then when you reach the front, also these indents for the area where the sun visors go can be a bit tricky. And then where the overhead panels are, because a lot of times you'll need to stretch that material a little bit to get it to contour correctly. And like I mentioned before, it's going to be a good practice to use a piece of cardboard just to prevent any overspray from getting on the facing side where you don't want it to be. So once everything is glued, once you have formed most of the material with your hands, you're going to start with the trimming process. I get out my fresh razor blade, and I usually trim these left and right side edges first. A lot of times the material doesn't need to be folded over these edges. It's a good thing to check when you're removing stuff from your car, because a lot of times the B-pillars and then the weather stripping, I guess, for the windows and doors will cover these left and right sides. So you don't even need to worry about folding these over. But then I start by cutting kind of a hole that leaves a lot of excess if you have a sunroof. And then also in this dome light overhead control panel up front here. So then as we move to the sunroof part, this is going to be the trickiest part to get right, because the corners of the sunroof are such a tough spot for, I guess, the material to get into. And unless you have a super stretchy material, even then it's going to be difficult. So what I do is I like to incrementally trim, more and more smaller pieces off the material, get closer to the edges, start trying to contour it in as I go. And then when I'm ready, when it's trimmed down enough, but not too far, I'm going to apply a bit of glue to those corners. And then, as you can see in the picture here, I've used clamps on each of the corners. And even then, I've not been able to get it like completely perfect before, but this will at least let you not be, leaving like little slit marks or little marks where, there's no material because you've cut too much. So that's the danger there, I guess, with the sunroof opening. And then just a bit more on the kind of the fine details. You're going to want to leave about 1 inch to a 1/2 inch. This should be the other way around, of material around any of the edges. So the front of the headliner where it meets the windshield, and then the back of it where it meets your back window. Things like that, spots where you're going to see. You're going to want to apply glue carefully to those edges, to the foam side on those edges, let it cure up just the same as before, and then fold it over those edges so that you get a nice kind of finish around all these corners. And a trick, because I've done this before, of course you try and try, but sometimes you will still accidentally get a bit of adhesive on the wrong side of the fabric. I found that if the adhesive is still tacky, is still wet, you can use a little bit of Goo Gone, and you can scrub just gently on that area. It'll still look dark like this for a little while the Goo Gone dries up. But once it dries up, usually you'll be able to have gotten out those little spots of glue if you get overspray on those. An important note again on a sunroof car, there is this little silver metal strip in most of them that I've found. This is my W210 wagon. I believe this strip was also in the W124. It slides into this black part of, I guess, the roof framing of the car. There's basically a little slot, and you need to make sure that this metal frame gets put onto the back of your your headliner board before you glue your material over. You're going to glue your material over this metal piece, because this metal piece needs to slide into the back, and it normally comes unglued. And if it does not get put back in place, you're going to have a gap between basically where the headliner goes into the back of the sunroof opening, because that's what holds it, the headliner board, into place there. And then I just have a few notes on reassembly, because of course, like disassembly, it's going to vary based on what car you're working with. But a lot like removing, the hardest part is getting the new board into position, or the newly finished board into the correct position. So like on this W203, you're going to need to put the wiring harness back in place, glue it in place. And then most models, unfortunately, I don't have a picture of this either, but on the back of the sunroof board, there's usually a hook or hooks or Velcro or something that holds it to the roof of the car in the rear of the car, so that back part doesn't hang down. So you want to make sure that those hooks, of course, line up with the appropriate spot on the roof. So here's another picture of the reassembly process. Basically, at this point, if you've got the headliner back in place, you can just basically do the easy part. You can put your sun visors, pillar trim, grab handles, all that good stuff back in place. And then eventually it's time to sit back and enjoy your handiwork, basically, once you've finished. So that was my little spiel. Does anyone have any questions?
Marquis mentioned it's his understanding that you don't want the fabric to be too heavy, or it will want to fall down. I guess that gets back to your 1/8 inch versus, thickness of the padding.
Right. The thinner foam, and then like I put vinyl on there. I've never used vinyl for a headliner, and I would be a bit wary to, but I just know that it's an option. But of course, vinyl is a heavier material, so I feel like over time that would be more susceptible to drooping.
What's the original material typically?
Well, like with the W124, it was a thin vinyl, and then I found that, like with the 210, it was a regular foam backed, just cloth, like automotive fabric. In the CL, because it's drooping down a bit, and I've seen below, it doesn't even seem like it has a foam backed fabric. It just seems like it has a thick, kind of almost velour type fabric, but not really. So I'm not certain there.
Well, that's a really high-end car too. They would have used the best of whatever they were using on that one.
Yeah. No, you can definitely tell it's a good material, but it doesn't seem to have that foam backing. So
I don't see other questions, so I'll ask you a few that came up in my mind as we were
Okay.
going through. You know, we're taking
Sure.
that headliner out. Did you require another person to help you, or were you able to do that alone?
I've done them all myself. It would definitely help to have a second person though, because otherwise you're kind of, in the case of like these sedans where you have to contort it, you're kind of running around the car, getting the back end into the right position, getting the front end back into the right position. But it's definitely something you can do by yourself. It's just going to take a little bit longer.
Mike Mahan asks, have you tried using, I guess it's 3M adhesive remover to remove the old glue?
I have not. That's a good idea though.
Yeah, I recall when I was doing hood insulation on one of my cars, I ended up going to the local hardware store and buying every solvent they had to try to figure out what I could use to pull it off. And it's often hard to predict what's going to remove whatever your adhesive is.
Yeah. In most cases, on these, the material has been so far gone that I could just scrape it off or use the drill. And then, combination of the degreaser. But yeah, if it's a little tougher, I would think a solvent might help a lot.
Okay, Dean Prince asked us, we had planned to use a paint roller for smoothing after gluing, but you used bare hands and did fine?
I did, yeah. And that's been the method I've used. But maybe I want to say like a harder paint roller. I know that they have the harder paint rollers there in the hardware store. That might be a good approach as well. But I think you definitely need your hands for some of the finer contoured areas, like these, where these handles are and the visors and things like that. Or, it could be helpful too to leave like a heavy object in there too, in the corners, just to really make sure it sticks.
Yeah, I know when I did the somewhat half-assed repair on my 400E, where I just let the headliner hang down and I tried to scrape as much of the foam off of it as I could, and then vacuumed it out and then sprayed it with adhesive and pushed it up. I had bought rollers to do that with, and I found that just pushing it up with my hands, as long as your hands are really clean, was really a better approach than trying to use a roller.
Yeah.
And Mike mentioned a wallpaper roller might work well, 4-inch wide rubber. I know, like I said, when I've done this, in the car pushing up on the ceiling, I found that my hands were really the way to go. You just have to make sure your hands are really clean.
Yeah, obviously. And then because that glue gets just super tacky after you leave it for 5 or 6 minutes. It really sticks there. So another good point is that make sure that you've got everything lined up so that you don't get creases or wrinkles when you're folding your fabric back over, because after that glue has set up, if you try to pull it up, you're going to pull off that foam backing too.
You think it'd be very different doing a R129 hardtop?
That's actually my next one, so we'll find out. I think that one's going to be quite easy just because it's one solid piece. There's no sunroof opening. There's no other openings at all.
Now, you don't have to take the headliner, the backing off of the top on that one, right? On the 129?
The backing, what do you mean?
Well, I was thinking that for 129, you take the hardtop, lay it on the ground padded so you didn't screw it up, pull the fabric off of it, and the fiberglass backing stays on the top, I think. I've never done it. I don't know.
I suppose you could do that. I went ahead and just took mine out because I have my hardtop off for the spring summer, even though we got food a little bit here in Georgia. Now it's cold again. But yeah, I just took the headliner board off of the hardtop.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that difficult. You just take a few little trim pieces off, and I think that'll make it easier to work with too when you're going to put the new material on.
Yeah, Dean mentions that he took the fiberglass form off of the one on his 129. Yeah, I actually got a freebie top given to me that I was planning to practice on before I did my SL600's top. So
Okay.
Marquis mentions previous owner did his hard top with black vinyl, and he asks the question, does the glue require good ventilation to not asphyxiate or get lightheaded? He's comments he's never used it before. He's decided, how to set up his shop to do it safely.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. I've done it on my patio and, in the garage. So outdoors, plenty of ventilation, I think, is definitely the right approach there.
Yeah. Yeah, if we have other questions, we can use the raise hand function. I can call on you too if we have other questions. Since there's not that many of us, we won't get into too big a gaggle. Any other questions? It makes me motivated to do it on a station wagon first.
Definitely.
Any other questions on any other topic that we might be able to address with this group? It's probably a pretty knowledgeable group. I know Brooks has done a fair amount of other things other than hard tops.
Oh gosh, probably more than I, have any business doing or taking on.
Yeah, and he's working on a M119 engine right now that has kind of a boom, 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 boom noise that he's trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any other topics? Any other questions? No? Okay. Nothing's jumping up. Okay, well, in that case.
All right. Sorry, I was trying to type, but I can't get type fast enough.
Okay, that's all right. This is Jake?
This is Jake. Hey, have you guys have you ever tackled a headliner that is not based on a fiberboard like this, but one of the older school with the wires and the I'm restoring a W111 and have to tackle the headliner on that one at some point, and it's a whole different ballgame than what you've got here. So I'm just curious if you had any experience with those.
I sure haven't. It's all been fiberglass for me, unfortunately.
I think I did that on a Volkswagen Beetle one time. I think I had to buy a new headliner that had the wires in it and manipulate the wires to come down.
Yeah, my struggle is that it's got the foam backing behind that's shaped in contour to and that's the challenge I've got right now, that I'm trying to figure out how to rebuild the old foam that's gotten brittle just like yours, but in a different setting. So okay, thank you.
Yeah, on one of my 208s, the foam backed upholstery had come off where your elbows go in the back seats, and I ended up buying some foam, thin foam, and separately, cleaning the fabric. I think it may even be a leather, I'm not sure, but gluing the foam separately to it and then to the fabric, and then doing another coat of glue on the outside of the foam and gluing that onto the car. In my observation, the glue tends to be okay, but the foam just falls apart, and you end up with foam like dust that's glued to both sides of the thing.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
You may just be able to buy an appropriate foam and glue that in the right places.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Oh, there's one from Marquis. Marquis is asking about the ASR light, limp home while stuck in traffic on a very hot day. Happened to me twice last summer, but no check engine, stored for diagnosis. I've got some comments on that. Brooks, you ever seen that one?
Not that particular one. Have you ever had the car shut off on you when that happens?
No, it didn't shut off. It was it went into limp mode. So I was like in downtown Atlanta, and the light came on. It was like very hot outside, and so I went to when traffic started moving again, I pressed the accelerator, nothing happened. So I had to like put my foot to the floor to go like 3 miles an hour. I just pulled over and turned the car off and turned it back on, and it was fine again. And then it came up again after sitting in the heat again. Once traffic opened up, they'll start moving, and it never came back. And it happened on a separate occasion. It's only when it's really hot, when I'm sitting and idling for like a long time, like getting stuck in traffic in Atlanta. Then, like I said, there's like no code that I could read. I just have a basic OBD2 scanner, and there's no like code left. So it's kind of, it's a 98, so I shouldn't have the wiring harness issue. So I don't really know what else it could be.
Well,
some things I've seen about the electronic throttle body or whatever, but that's all I can think of.
I'll tell you my story of limp mode on one of my cars. It's 998. It's a 92 500E. It is an M119 engine. It's a somewhat different M119 engine from what's in your 98. When I bought the car, it was on eBay. I bought it, and I was flying out to Texas to drive it home, which is one of my favorite things to do. However, they called me up and said it went to limp home mode when they were starting it that morning and delivering it to where I was going to pick it up from. And so I told them to start it at lunchtime, start at dinner time, and see if it did it. Didn't do it again. Flew out there, got in the car about 11 o'clock that day, drove it home. I was afraid to stop. And so I drove it home in about 13 hours from Dallas, 13 and a half hours. Very late night, no problem. Get in the car 2 days later to go to church, and I couldn't get out of my driveway. And it was in limp home mode and just wouldn't go anywhere. And it's a little different from yours because they have a backup, cable throttle assembly. And what I learned, and this was almost by coincidence, I saw it on a forum that something like this happened, and I was working on my 400E, which is exactly the same throttle linkage, and it was much looser than the one that was on the 500E. And what I learned there for that car, there's a Mercedes specified throttle linkage lubrication that you do with automatic transmission fluid. And all it was happening, it was getting a little stiction, and the throttle encoder was giving a mismatch, and the computer said, I'm not going to play, and I'm going to go into limp home mode. So I was able to fix that for zero cost. But your car doesn't have that, so that's not going to be it. The other piece, though, later on, I got into a hard limp home mode that would not go away. It was a couple years later, and went into the troubleshooting modes, and it had some fault codes, but it was a hard limp home. It would not go away, and it was the throttle body, and I had to send out for the throttle body. I sent to a shop to rebuild it, and he looked at it and said, this one's really bad. I'm going to give you a different one instead. Because, not only does the wiring harness inside the throttle body degrade, which is what most people end up changing, but, there's a set of variable resistors in there that tracks up and gets worn after a while. And your car does have that, but so it could be the beginnings of that failure. Now, but mine was a hard failure, which is much easier to diagnose than what you're describing. And the other thing that you might notice, if you're standing at the engine compartment on one of these and have the key in position 2 with the engine not running, you hear a high-pitched whine, right? Like a tone. And that tone's the throttle body being the throttle body. And get used to that tone. If that tone isn't there, your throttle body's died. So that might be a useful thing to note if it does that. The other thing I'm thinking about is that some cars, and I don't know the 98 does this. I have a 98 SL500 as well, but I've never seen anything like this. But some of the cars have a protective function based on temperature, like oil temperature, and will shut you down into a limp home mode on oil temperature. I've never heard of that on an SL500. I've heard of that on some of the newer cars when they try to take them to the track, and suddenly the car does a lap or two and says, I'm not playing anymore because my oil's too hot. And there's a temperature protection in there too. You never know. Mercedes does not explain what it did to the electronics of the cars very well. And so, maybe something sneaky in there to do a temperature protection.
Okay.
And the way to look at that, if you have a scanner that'll do live data, look at every piece of engine live data that you can and see if something's going weird.
Yeah, I'll just have to keep it in center console.
Well, yeah,
Like I said, it's very intermittent. It's only happened like twice, but
yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully it won't happen again. But you know, if it gets so it just stays that way all the time, you'll be able to fix it. If it's intermittent, you'll probably never fix it. But
yeah.
but you know, it's not unusual for me to drive around the car for quite a while with a scanner hooked up too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Although I
must
got a
keep one.
BMW, so that I have to do that kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know that vintage of Mercedes is really kind of challenging because from 94 to 99-ish, they're transitioning more and more stuff to digital, but you still have the 38-pin connector too. And so it's almost
Yeah.
hard to predict which are going to be analog and need a blink code and which are digital and will actually talk to the 38-pin connector. Then the engine stuff's probably over on the OBD2 by that time. So it's really a little weird.
Yep.
Yeah, like I said, I have one.
Yeah, that's what I want to get eventually, is a scanner that'll play with the 38 pin on like the 98 sort of range, because you don't get that data on just the OBD. You just
Yeah, you
get the
don't.
engine stuff.
I've got a Foxwell NT530 with a 38-pin connector, and I've been able to do that, but it says it doesn't do pre-99 SL500s. I've still been able to trick it and read some of that, but and I
Yeah.
just got an iCarSoft. I haven't tried the 38-pin adapter to that, but you got to, you know, for the C-Class, those SLs, you've got to think about, do I need the 38-pin or do I need the OBD2, whether it's engine or chassis? So, all right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Well, I want to thank each of you for participating, and Brooks, I want to thank you for taking the time to put this very nice presentation together. I see that you're into e-learning. It was very well put together, and
Thank you.
and you know, learning by objective type thing almost. So watch out for our tech sessions. We're going to try to do something about once a month. Some of them will be Zoom, some of them will be in person. We'd love you to participate in any of these, and let us know if you have some topics you'd like us to cover.
Thank you all very much.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. And don't forget, karting the 2nd of April. Still need some more folks. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and then end the meeting here. Brooks, thank you very much. That was really well done.
Thank you, Gary.
Good.
I appreciate it.
All right, good night.
Yep, I'll see you.